I like your background too.
Thanks. All right.
Good morning, everybody. We are letting the room open up. We're going to let the numbers grow. I know we've got probably all of us wanting to watch split screen at 11 when the governor makes his initial remarks about whether or not each industry in the Commonwealth can get reopened. But I know that Catherine has the great NAR legal team ready to send in messages as they happen. So Catherine's going to be our reporter on the street to let us know if anything significant happens while the governor makes his remarks at 11 o'clock today. So now that we're watching that, but we figured that we would bring back two names you've already seen before, because we're getting a lot of questions about the mechanics of a lot of what's going on. You know, what's changed since we first started doing these? What forms do we need? What forms do we not need? How do these forms get filled out? You know, and other questions like that. So I hope people feel comfortable using our Q&A button on the bottom of the screen. We've got Christian from NAR and Catherine from NAR. And between all of us, we will do our best to update everybody on where things are as we approach Memorial Day weekend, which is always a huge, significant weekend for us here on the Cape and Islands. So without further ado, Ryan, off to you.
All right, thanks. I'm gonna go through a couple things before we get started today. If Marissa can enable screen sharing and I can get going here. Thank you. All right. So once again, we want to just thank you, the Cooperative Bank of Cape Cod, for being our presenting sponsor of the Zoom weekly one. So we've been doing it for 2 months now about. Greg, can you believe that already? But we are going to be moving it, and we've heard so much feedback from you guys about how much you like it. We'll move it to a monthly thing ongoing, and so we'll start that actually in June. And we have the first one in June is actually a more of a internal business type of zoomed in on real estate, as we are going to be talking about proposed bylaw amendments. The board of directors last week passed coming out of the governance task force to revamp some of our bylaws and governance structures. And so there'll be a membership vote on it at the end of June. And so we just on June 1st, ability to talk about it on the Zoomed In on Real Estate. So that'll be the one we do there for June, and then we'll be doing one monthly after that. The plan is the first Monday of the month, but obviously if it falls on holidays, things of that nature, we will move it and let you know, guys know ahead of time. But the feedback of these have been so great, we wanted to continue them. So a couple things. We have our our CE webinars, Pathways to Professionalism. It's a new class we wrote that's class as we go to submit registration for approval itself. This is based on kind of NAR's Pathways to Professionalism years ago, and really the professionalism class that you guys have talked about needing and wanting as far as what we should be looking at for raising that professionalism among our membership. And so that debuts this Wednesday at 1 o'clock. We do that CE every Wednesday at 1, and then always on demand CEs from the Massachusetts Association of Realtors. Recorded CEs are available as well on our websites. This Friday, May 22nd, 10:30 a.m., 480 minutes, time management strategies with national speaker Valerie Garcia. Valerie's hosted 2 other professional development webinars for us already this in the last couple weeks, and it's been really well attended, so you won't want to miss this one either. So take the time and take a look at it. Are doing on the MLS side as the perhaps the stay-at-home order type of ends, but the board directors met last week and they are enabling the in-person open house marketing feature to be turned back on starting tomorrow. We have a best practices on how to conduct open houses in this environment coming out as well. And then the open house has forever changed. The way you've been doing it is not the way you'll want to do it even in the future. And so this best practices guide will talk about, and I think virtual open houses will still be a wave of the future and still be done. Even when you start allowing open houses again. However, like I said, open houses should not be run the way you ran them, 6 months ago, a year ago. Also, the coming soon no showing status will be at 21 days only starting today. We had allowed it from 21 days from when the stay-at-home order ended, but we are moving it to only 21 days starting today, starting from whenever you enter a listing that starts today. So if you enter a coming soon listing today, it can only stay in the coming soon status for 21 days, then it will become active. Same as tomorrow, it'll be 21 days from then, all that sort of stuff. That is the normal coming soon policy that will be back in effect. Greg, on open houses, real quick, what are you telling your age of the virtual open house and the wave of the coming of the future with the different changes we've been making in this industry? I say this industry's moved 10 years in technology in 2 months.
So yeah, I go back to what we saw. If you remember a few weeks ago, we had a guest from NAR talking about the data that's out there in terms of how the home buying process has shifted. And buyers are viewing fewer properties before deciding on making an offer. Well, I think a lot of that is because we're offering so many more virtual tools to vet houses, to choose between houses. So, we talked about as recently as this morning how you might see a wave of virtual open houses on a Wednesday or a Thursday, maybe in the early evening, so that you can help people choose which houses they're going to narrow down when they come visit them on the weekend to see in person, because they might only want to see 1 or 2 houses in person. So I think this is something that not everybody comes to the Cape and Islands in January, February, March. They don't come down here to go visit houses as much when it's not as beautiful as it's going to be over the next 8 to 10 to 12 weeks. But we have more and more capability than ever to help buyers, not just from the listing agent side, but to help buyers from the buyer agent side really vet and sort through properties. And I think one of the things that I've encouraged everybody I've talked to, not only those in my own company, but everyone I'm talking to on a regular basis, is let's lean into these. First of all, we've got maybe a free hall pass where it's going to be clunky and awkward for the first couple of months. So let's take advantage of that freedom to maybe mess it up a couple of times. Because by the time we get to, again, January, February, and March, we're going to love having this as a tool that's available to all of us, whether there's a health crisis or not. God willing, I hope there's not. But this is a huge opportunity for a vacation market to really lead the way. And I look forward to seeing how we as realtors on the Cape and Islands really continue to lead the way. I mean, look at the opportunities on Nantucket and Martha's Vineyard that are going to be here for doing some of this stuff. So yeah, I think it's a really exciting time, and I think we all just need to help each other lean into it a little bit so that we can show our professionalism at its highest.
Yeah, I've said this for a while, is that selling your house sucks. I mean, like, I mean, granted, if it's vacant here, like a lot of the properties are, that's different. But, even the ones that aren't, you have to keep it clean. You having to leave for showings, all that. It seems like the metric for so long was how many showings did I get? That's your value. Yeah, that was the metric listing agents wanted to put out there, right? And it really shouldn't be. It should be, how quick did I sell your house for the highest price I can? Moving on. So Catherine and Christian, we both have you here, Catherine from the Massachusetts Association of Realtors and Christian from the National Association of Realtors. Last we talked to you, Christian, it was right when PPP and EIDL and all the SBA loans had started, and the federal government had authorized the independent contractor status for unemployment insurance. We've talked a lot about through it. I've seen a lot of members get PPP loans. Some have been frustrated by that whole process. What's the latest from Capitol Hill on what we could expect with more help in that realm in the future?
Sure thing. So the biggest news actually broke on Saturday. the SBA finally released the PPP loan forgiveness application. And so for those who did acquire a PPP loan under $2 million, the application is now available online, provides step-by-step instructions in terms of how to apply for forgiveness. So that has been something NAR has been pushing for over a month in terms of clarification on how to apply for that forgiveness. So hopefully that will take care of some anxiety among our members and for small businesses. So that's sort of the latest news on the PPP side of things. As of about a week and a half ago, there was still about 40% of funding still available. So if you haven't applied for a PPP loan yet, perhaps you were hesitant because of the backlog, because of the bumpy rollout of the program. There is still funding available if you'd like to apply now. So, you're certainly encouraged to do so if you need some kind of relief or assistance. In terms of kind of where things are heading with that loan program, a bill was just introduced and voted on Friday in the House of Representatives called the HEROES Act. The bill pretty much modifies the forgiveness requiremess. As you know, with PPP, 75% had to be dedicated towards payroll in order for it to be forgivable. This new bill would modify that and loosen some of the restrictions on the forgiveness so that it would truly be a grant program as was intended by Congress. The problem is the bill that was introduced and voted on by the House is pretty much dead on arrival in the Senate. And so we likely will not see another relief package here in terms of a compromise package, probably until sometime between Memorial Day weekend and July 4th. So I wouldn't expect to see any movement on any type of legislative package forthcoming until probably, mid-June, early July.
All right. And anything else coming out of Capitol Hill that our members need to be aware of that might be coming down the pipe? I know you guys have been working on, you continue to get the delays, you stretch the delays on the 1031 tax exchanges. Anything else like that, little minutia stuff that we may not be thinking about that makes a big difference?
Yeah, I mean, like for example, I think it was early May, we were able to get the FHFA to extend their loan processing flexibilities to allow for alternative appraisals, employment verification. We were able to get them to extend it until June 30th. So that'll be helpful. In terms of other types of deadline extensions, I mean, I think we'll probably not see much more on that in terms of extensions, likely at all. The way things stand, just to give you a broader sense of, I think, where a lot of folks in Washington are coming from is, especially on the Republican side of things, now that the economy are opening back up in states across the country, there seems to be more of a hesitance on offering more relief, spending more money, offering more deadlines until we get a sense of what the reopening of economies will have in terms of an impact. And if, come mid-June, a month from now, the economy still isn't moving, I think perhaps you'll see a little more motivation, at least on the Republican side, to move more quickly on more relief. But at the moment, it almost seems as though Congress and the administration kind of want to take a bit of a pause and see where things go here over the next couple of weeks.
So you may not know this, but I wanted to ask because we had a question come in, which is a good one. The SBA forgiveness application came out over the weekend, as you said. Who makes the determination if you've met the requirements for forgiveness, the local bank or the SBA themselves?
I believe it's the SBA themselves.
Okay. But the bank should be able to give you guidance on that as you complete that application.
Yeah, I believe there are 4 forms, 2 of which you turn into your lender, and I think the other 2 you turn into the SBA. I'm pretty sure.
Okay, great stuff there. Catherine, what's the latest that you're getting on in legal questions? I know I'm getting a lot about the health forms and other things some people are using, but what else are you getting on the legal hotline, and what's your advice out now to members as they move forward?
Right. Thanks for having me again. It's always a pleasure to join you guys on these chats. So like you, I've been receiving a lot of questions from members about all sorts of different forms that are circulating out there, primarily health questionnaires and other types of forms that are potentially going to restrict somebody's access to the property. And that's sort of the crux of that question is I think we've moved beyond whether you can use a health questionnaire, but sort of to the point of what happens if I don't want to fill out a questionnaire. So our recommendation sort of, it's on both sides of the coin. So as a seller, if you're working with a seller and they want to be screening potential buyers and their agents and anyone else who might be looking to gain access to the property, have a conversation with your seller about whether they want to ask those questions. They're certainly able to. That is the seller's discretion. It is a lawful option for them. So if a seller instructs you to try to gather that information from people looking to come into the property, that's a lawful instruction that you can and should follow. On the other side, when you're representing a buyer, if you have a buyer for whatever reason doesn't want to answer that question, they're not comfortable releasing their personal health information, it's not a mandatory form. So they have that option to not provide that information. Your job as their agent in that situation is to make sure they understand that that is their choice, but that it's going to limit their options for viewing property potentially. And on the same point, a seller should be aware that they may be limiting their prospective pool of buyers by restricting people who don't answer these questions. If you're in this situation where you've got a seller who's looking for this information and a buyer who doesn't want to provide it, that's really where you prove your value as a realtor and talk to the other side and see if you can come to some sort of mutually agreeable resolution that satisfies both the seller and the buyer's concerns with that information. Maybe the buyer agent goes in and live streams it, or they make another sort of virtual tour option available. I mean, there's a lot of options out there, and really, I've been saying this all along, a key to successfully working through this pandemic is going to be communication. These are uncharted territories. We haven't had to deal with these situations a lot. So as long as you keep those lines of communication open, I have faith that all of you are going to be able to come to solutions to work through these, tricky situations that we're dealing with.
So the other thing is NAR came out last week with or maybe 2 weeks ago now, with a lot of questions around fair housing related to COVID. And one of their questions has been, are individuals who have federal fair housing acts? And they said yes, when infectious disease such as COVID-19 is associated with specific population or nationality fears and realtors may not discriminate against individuals based on the national origin. How about what else on the fair housing side has come up?
Yes, so I only caught about half of that. I think you're having audio issues. I'm not sure if it's me or
apparently it's me. So
okay. So fair housing issues, like you said, NAR has come out with some information on there. I would definitely recommend that everybody take a look at the NAR website. There's a ton of really good information there, as well as the NAR COVID-19 website. So there's tons of information there. I obviously can't cover it all here. But I believe the NAR's guidance, and Christian, obviously correct me if I'm wrong on this, but I believe their guidance is to treat the COVID-19 as though it falls within a protected class, because there are a lot of those fair housing concerns, particularly when it is associated with a specific group of individuals, whereas here, you know, we do see a lot of that, and the potential for stigmatizing or potentially discriminating against individuals of certain protected classes is sort of at an elevated risk. So definitely tread carefully with these. If you are, and I know I've said this a million times and you're probably all sick of hearing me say this, if you are using any of these types of questionnaires, please make sure that you're providing them to everybody, not just picking and choosing who they're provided to. If it's the seller's wish to ask these questions, ask it to everybody. Don't ask it based on some arbitrary criteria.
All right, great. Thank you very much. Can you all hear me a little better now?
Yes.
Okay. So the other stuff is today the governor speaking in about 8 minutes. Is there anything really looking for besides the big nut on the Cape and Islands, which is what he's going to do about leisure capital? All right. Well, Greg, why don't you want to take over and while I try to figure out some audio issues?
Oh, now we can't hear you, Greg.
Greg.
It's okay, because I had my microphone turned off because, like you, I have young children turned around. But we're good now. So the crux of Ryan's question is the governor is going to speak in about 7 minutes. Is there anything that the Realtor Association is looking for, or expecting to hear, or hoping we hear in the governor's remarks, not only today, but in the coming days?
I know that we are all looking for a lot more clarity around this situation, particularly since today is May 18th, which is the end date for our current state of emergency. So the big question is, will it be extended? How long will it be extended? Our first phase of reopening is slated to open today. So what industries will that cover? The governor has, you know, been holding his cards very close to his chest over the last week. So, you know, as far as what that reopening looks like, we don't have a lot of insight into. What I expect that will include is going to be industries, you know, such as construction, manufacturing, agriculture, things of that nature, where distancing is a little more easily accomplished as opposed to an office environment. That being said, it's probably not going to have a huge impact on real estate in and of itself because we are an essential service. So we've been able to operate, you know, for some time now since this pandemic began. That being said, there are obviously other industries that do affect what we do that we would like to have opened. I don't know whether they will be included in phase 1 or in later phases, and you know what that sort of phasing through is going to look like. But I do hope we get a little bit more clarity today when the governor speaks with regard to short-term rentals. Gosh, I would pay a lot of money for a crystal ball to be able to tell you all what is going to happen. But, you know, I think that the governor is aware that it's an issue and is considering it. Anything beyond that, I don't know.
Well, so we do have, you know, a few questions that apply not only to rentals, but I think to showings and other activities that we've been doing.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, rentals, obviously, the date got extended to the 18th, but then was it tied to the stay-at-home order or was it tied to the state of emergency? None of us really know when that permissive date is going to happen. But what happens? I mean, what's the sense on a legal side of things? Like, what's the liability if someone were to do a showing and then a client were to get sick? I know we've talked about this on the NAR call. We haven't really talked here. Mm-hmm. Or if someone were to stay in a short-term rental and then someone were to come 2 weeks later and that person were to get sick. I mean, is there any liability that you believe any of us should be especially aware of on a legal side?
So I think the liability question, you know, I have been receiving that quite a bit. It's difficult to prove causation, particularly with this virus where the incubation period is so long, potentially, you know, a couple of weeks that it takes before you show symptoms or, anything along those lines where you could be contagious during that whole point. So proving causation is, that's a critical component to any liability that's imposed. So if you can't prove causation, it's going to be equally difficult to prove liability on somebody's part. So I think that the risk in most situations is going to be relatively low if a tenant who stayed at a property that you were working on later became ill. It's going to be really difficult to prove. That's not to say that there aren't certain precautions that you all should be taking and your homeowner should be taking to limit that risk. So make sure that you're engaging in appropriate cleaning following the stays. If somebody does inform you that they became ill, do your part in helping to do that community tracing so that other people who may have potentially been infected are aware of that to help minimize that spread. But as far as a liability perspective, it's a very difficult case to be made. Not to say it won't be impossible, and not to say that there won't likely be some litigation stemming from this. I mean, people sue for everything, so I suspect that there will be some people who try to find liability in this situation, but I think it's an uphill battle for sure.
And Greg, can people hear me now?
Yeah, and I just want to, so Ryan, I know has been working, Ryan sits on the Barnstable County Reopening Task Force, and I know they're working on what would the cleaning standards be to allow towns to feel comfortable allowing short-term rentals and all that stuff. So know that we're working on that stuff. That's going to be unveiled to us in due time. But I think in terms of the liability piece, I think there's another question. Can we do waivers or all that stuff? I mean, I think, Catherine, correct me if I'm wrong, but you would always say that's maybe a conversation to have with your E&O provider or your broker of record. There's probably not going to be something statewide in which we create a waiver that says, hey, we're absolved from all because circumstances different.
That was spot on, Greg. NAR is not developing a liability waiver. If you or your brokerage are interested in developing that, certainly speak with your E&O insurance and have your own attorney draft that for you. Please don't draft it yourselves.
Yeah. Ryan,
we're going to say something and I talked over you. So
yeah, Christian, yeah, go ahead.
No, I was just going to add, Senator Mitch McConnell in the Senate, he's made it very clear that liability protection is a top priority for the GOP in this next bill coming through. So you'll probably start hearing a larger discussion about this as well at the federal level in the weeks to come.
Yeah, Greg, how am I sound?
Much better.
All right, great. So last week, people keep asking Greg, like, what's going on with short-term rentals and what are we doing, right? We submitted a pretty lengthy 4 or 5 page letter to the Governor's Reopening Task Force last week from the Cape Cod and Island Association of Realtors outlining the reasons why for leisure accommodation short-term rentals could be more easily acceptable under social distancing and no contact check-ins, because I would promote that if you do short-term rentals, you go ahead and figure out a no-contact check-in process and check-out process in case they do open. You need to be thinking through that stuff. But as far as why they should be allowed, and then also guidelines for cleaning as well, and some proposals we put to the governor's task force for that. And then also in addition, we'll be releasing when they are allowed. We're not putting them out yet because we don't want to make any suppositions that they're going to be allowed. But if they are allowed, we'll be releasing model cleaning plans and things like that you can be using to talk to your cleaners and also be using to promote out to your tenants of here's the stuff we're doing to make sure your stay would be enjoyable if you do have one.
Yeah, I mean, I think the interesting thing for me, Ryan, is we're going to do this for short-term rentals, but then, we've always and maybe Catherine, the NAR purchase and sale, right, says that at a closing, the house should be like broom clean or words to that effect. Right. At what point do cleaning standards get brought into the closings? I think it's something that we're going to have to evaluate. And I know a lot of attorneys, and we've had lenders talk about how there are overlays on like FHA and Fannie and Freddie guidelines. We're now seeing attorneys put overlays on things like the smoke detectors or things like the purchase and sale and all that stuff. Do you see MAR looking to change any of the language in their standard forms at all, or do you think we're just going to defer to the attorneys on a case-by-case basis on stuff like that?
So that's a really good question. At this point, I don't think that we are looking to amend any of our standard forms. If we do develop anything, it will likely be in the form of an addendum, just to avoid having to go back and hopefully soon, when this is all over, to take that language out, because you would, for example, you wouldn't always need that elevated cleaning standard, but it may make sense to have it as part of your agreement while we're in the midst of this COVID situation. So if we do anything, it would likely be in the form of an addendum.
And then there was a great question by Lorian about children needing to have masks and gloves for showings. I mean, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, we're going to say the governor has said that all children 2 and over who are able to, 2 to 5, should wear masks if they're able to, but there's the parent discretion if they can't.
Right.
But children under 2 shouldn't. That fully covers the 3-year-old and the 1.5-year-old in my house. But I mean, there have been a lot of questions about showings and letting the whole family in and on a fair housing. Can you say, like, you can come in, but your kids can't come in? I mean, do you want to just refresh everyone's memory on that?
Yes, great point. So as far as, restricting children, again, that's a potential fair housing issue that we certainly don't want to see any of our members caught up in the middle of. If you're looking to restrict access, types of restrictions that you can put on would be limited to decision makers, for example. So the example I always give is when I bought my house, it was my husband and I who bought the property, but we brought my father-in-law with me because he's really handy and he does a lot of home projects. But in this situation, it would be reasonable to say, well, he's not a decision maker because he's not actually buying the house, so we can exclude him without breaching any of those fair housing considerations. But trying to restrict someone from my immediate family, my kid could be considered a decision maker in the property. So again, there are a lot of reasonable concerns for restricting access on whatever basis, but that doesn't mean that they're not in breach of the fair housing laws. So if your seller is uncomfortable with children and somebody shows up with a child at the property, I wouldn't say, time out, no children, you can't come in. Again, I would engage in that communication, have a discussion, see if you can figure out a solution that addresses everybody's concerns. Obviously, you can place the same restrictions on the children that you would anyone else who's looking to enter the property. Wearing proper protective gear, limiting contact with surfaces, washing their hands, using sanitizer, wearing gloves, wearing a mask. Whatever it is that the seller is asking of everybody else is reasonable to ask of the children as well. You could, depending on the age of the child, you could say, well, is it possible for you to carry the child through the property to limit their touching surfaces? Maybe that's an option. If there are 2 adults there, maybe have them, stagger, one goes in without the children, the other stays out with the child. So, there are a lot of options that you can engage in that's going to address everybody's concern. But I think any blanket restriction on saying kids aren't allowed is going to potentially get you in some trouble.
So I remember vividly back to when I was 10 and my parents moved us for like the 7th time in 9 years. And I was like, but I didn't get to help choose this house. And they're like, yeah, you didn't get to pay for the house either. So, I know that feeling as a child. And I also know trying to carry my 3-year-old through a whole house when she wants to squirm and get down is just not always possible. So I think we just have to be as tolerant and appreciative of the showing opportunity as we can. But I do heed your warning that saying that children can't come in is a can of worms for fair housing that none of us really want to approach as we look at this.
Also, I just wanted to bring up, I know a lot of people for a while have talked about that seasonal guidance, that guidance to seasonal homeowners and other things that Barnstable County released several weeks ago, and Nantucket and Martha's Vineyard hospitals also released. The Barnstable Reopening Task Force, we're looking at revising that tomorrow. So be expecting some other guidance related to seasonal homeowners later this week. That's a big portion of our meeting tomorrow. We meet twice a week in that Barnstable Reopening Task Force that I'm part of in figuring all that out.
So I had a quick question for Christian, and it's probably a complicated question that can't be answered in a 3-hour call, let alone 30 seconds. But, one of the things that's come up is that, if you want to travel to Rhode Island from Massachusetts, there are different restrictions or vice versa. But, a lot of these towns and state lines, we're so used to in New England going from state to state to state in an hour or two. Is there anything that local associations or the National Association can be or should be doing to help keep that inter-New England commerce or freedom of our clients to move around happening on a real estate sense? I mean, many of our short-term rental customers come from Rhode Island, Connecticut, New Hampshire, other places, and it seems like there are going to be different standards based on where they reside. Is there any talk at NAR about addressing that or looking at that?
Yeah, I mean, that's obviously an issue that I think our membership is going to be facing across the country, in that, states are reopening on different time frames and different timelines. And so we're going to be having much different discussions with folks in Florida and Georgia, which have now been open for weeks, versus that of, say, Massachusetts, where you all are just starting to reopen. But even, I think, Maine, Rhode Island, and New Hampshire have all already, moved into, I think, their phase 1 of reopening. So, I'm not aware of any particular guidance that NAR has offered in terms of kind of, I guess, stimulating that sort of interstate commerce. But, certainly, I think our members just need to kind of keep abreast of how the regulations and restrictions differ between states, and making sure that they're following procedures, and that obviously their clients are doing so as well.
And Catherine, again, maybe it's a fair housing thing, but I know there was that famous case that came out maybe 2011, 2012, where someone was inadvertently asked where they were from, and then there was a lawsuit, and that was deemed to be a fair housing violation. I mean, in the days of coronavirus, when, maybe if you're not from Massachusetts, you need to have met certain testing or self-reporting. I mean, should we even be asking those questions, or is it the honor system?
Again, if you're asking questions, and I apologize, I was distracted because Johnny was texting me.
Yeah, he's texting me too. So we'll, talk about that in a second.
So, again, if you're asking any questions, they should be asked of everybody. That case you referenced, it was an agent who was just innocently making conversation with innocently, they say, making conversation with somebody and said, "Oh, you have an interesting accent. Where are you from?" Or something along those lines. And then that person ultimately ended up not getting that property. I think it was a rental. And there was a discrimination claim that they were successful on. So, certainly the threshold is not extraordinarily high for liability. So, tread carefully as of any questions you're asking of that nature.
So just to let everyone know, Governor Baker speaking now for those that are still on with us that haven't gone to him. But hotels are in phase 2, which should start about 3 weeks. Is the latest news. We assume that probably means all leisure accommodations, but we'll take a look into that on whether that includes STRs or not. That includes public pools as well. So, like I said, Greg, you and I have talked. We're going to come back with a special one later this week, today, this afternoon, tomorrow, sometime like that. We'll give you notice on to get your questions answered, because we know once we get all this guidance, it'll be interesting to talk about how we go from there. And hopefully Catherine or Johnny will join us from MAR to talk about that when that happens. So I wanted to go that route. But we do have a question, Christian, about PPP versus PUA. Catherine and Christian, what is your guidance? Was one better than the other for someone to apply for, or can they do both? What's the latest between whether to go to the SBA PPP or whether to just go for unemployment assistance?
I mean, do you want to take it, Christian?
Go ahead, Catherine, since you guys have a legal hotline getting getting comments in, I guess. I mean, from what I understand, it depends, but. Yeah.
Exactly. It depends on your specific situation, how you draw your money that you're earning. You should be talking to your finance person to get guidance as far as what program makes the most sense for your particular situation.
I will just say on that, the House bill that was voted on Friday does add an additional $600 on top of baseline unemployment benefits through the end of the year. So whether or not that stays in the bill that comes out of the Senate, who knows? But obviously, that's certainly one of the priorities from the more progressive side of things.
All right. Anything else questions-wise, guys, from our membership? If anyone has any more questions and answers, we'll do that. If not, we will wrap it up today and know that we'll come back with any latest information we get later this week. NAR has a ton of reopening your office materials and guidelines on the website. They can find that at coronavirus page, I would guess, Christian?
You got it. Yep.
Yeah, and I linked a lot of that in the chat earlier while Ryan was logging on and off, specifically the piece that Catherine was talking about, the guidance on coronavirus and fair housing. So if you scroll up in the chat, you'll see those links, and it's a PDF you can download right there and access, which is really a great resource. And nar.realtor/coronavirus is where you can go to get the latest updates, just like on Catherine's side, that narcovid19.com. and then cciaor.com/ I think COVID-19 is where you get to ours. So there are lots of resources that are coming out almost on an hourly basis these days for some of these.
One question was, if the state emergency stops, does like the unemployment assistance for independent contractor stop? That's not tied to any state of emergency. That's tied to the Federal CARES Act, right, Christian?
I'm sorry, what was it?
Unemployment insurance for independent contractors is the Federal CARES Act. Is not tied to any state of emergency issues, so that won't stop if state of emergency is lifted. That's been in that bill on that end. I do expect the state of emergency to extend for a longer time than a stay-at-home order. Remember, the state of emergency went into effect well before the stay-at-home order went into effect. Greg?
Yeah, and then so the only other thing I wanted to ask Catherine maybe to shed some light on, typically in 3 or 4 weeks, we would all be getting on a bus and we'd all be going to Beacon Hill and we'd all be meeting with our legislators to talk about the things that are important to our industry. I know, Christian, you've had to adapt how you interact and especially how members connect. And last week we had some great connection at the NAR mid-year legislative meetings. But Catherine, what's the local plan, or Christian, both of you are involved in that. What's the local plan for replacing our Realtor Day on Beacon Hill, our advocacy efforts that we relied on each year?
Yes, so from NAR, obviously, talked about it a lot, and it doesn't make sense this year for us to gather 400 or 500 people in the Great Hall at the State House and meet with our legislators, face to face, which is, really disappointing for everybody. I'm sure that's one of our favorite events that we have. Doesn't mean that the party won't go on. We're still going to do it. It will be hosted virtually. I believe that information should be coming out to all of our members very shortly if it hasn't yet been sent out. But stay tuned. We do have a plan to move forward. It'll be a little bit different, but it still should be a really great event.
Yeah.
All right. Well,
I was just going to say, from the federal side of things, we also have our federal political coordinators who liaise directly between NAR and members of Congress who are setting up virtual Zoom, more intimate conversations. Some FPCs are setting up larger sort of town hall style Zoom meetings, which is actually, I think, better than what we would have necessarily enjoyed had it just been a sort of an in-person meeting in DC. And then we have a number of members of Congress, I think including Congressman Keating, who is, there are some members of Congress who are willing to kind of videotape a Q&A so that you can then broadcast it out to your membership. So yeah, I mean, folks are adapting and members of Congress are adapting too.
All right. Well, thank you guys very much. And Greg, Thanks for this. And we will be back first Monday in June. And then every first Monday after that, barring some other holiday scheduled. But we'll definitely be back later this week with more information around the governor's reopening, the county's reopening, information about how it applies to our members.
Yeah, I mean, I would say just expect a pop-up zoomed in like we did for short-term rentals a couple weeks ago. As soon as we get the information, we'll make sure the whole Cape and Islands Realtor group get all of it from us immediately. And if we don't see you between now and then, have a great Memorial Day weekend. There's a lot. If you're a realtor bylaws wonk, you like be ready to take notes 2 Mondays from now on like all the things we're doing in our bylaws, and you can ask us all sorts of great questions that will make everyone's head spin. But that's what we'll be talking about in 2 weeks. If not, know that as soon as something comes out, Ryan and I and Marissa and Catherine and Johnny and Justin and the whole team will schedule one of these, and will help us all, because, you know, as I say, hashtag we're all in this together. We need to figure these all out as they come out, and we will not leave anyone in the dark on any of these. So just check your email, check Facebook, check all that stuff to know when we're going to join together next to get updated on the latest and greatest guidance from Beacon Hill and the governor's office.
And from the website, yes, hotels, all lodging, including short-term rentals, are included in phase 2. They'd be able to reopen to guests in phase 2, which I think is about 3 weeks from now, with restrictions. What those restrictions are, we don't have those guidance yet, but we'll expect that the next day or two, and then we'll be able to come and fully brief you. It might be a little while until we get that full guidance, and we want to be able to make sure we have your answers when we come out to you guys. So,
as always, reach out to us and ask us questions, because we'll chase them down if we can.
All right. Thank you, guys. Have a good one. Thank you, Catherine and Christian.
Thanks
Bye,
for having me
everybody.
again.
Thank you.